Welcome to AI Assembled, the top AI news for small business. I'm Chris Doelle, and each week I bring you the most important AI developments that can transform your business. Let's dive into this week's top stories.
The first week of March 2026 arrived, carrying the kind of news that arrives only once in a generation, and then kept arriving. If you work with AI tools, depend on AI platforms, or simply run a business in a world where artificial intelligence is becoming impossible to ignore, what happened between February 23rd and March 2nd belongs on your radar. Not the highlight reel, the full picture. Let's start with the model that launched the week's conversation. Anthropic released Claude Opus 4.6 on February 5th, and by late February, it was clear this was not a routine update. The headline feature is a 1 million token context window, 5 times the previous limit, which means a single conversation can now hold the equivalent of a full-length novel, an entire code base, or months of business documents without losing track. On the benchmark that matters most to enterprise users, GDP Val AA, which simulates complex economic task completion, Opus 4.6 beat GPT 5.2 by 144 ELO points. It topped Terminal Bench 2.0 for coding. It scored highest on humanity's last exam. The pricing held: $5 per million input tokens, 25 per million output. This is the model Anthropic is betting its commercial future on, and if the benchmarks hold in production, that bet has a real chance of paying off.
But the model itself is only part of the story. Claude Code, Anthropic's developer tool built on top of these models, shipped 6 significant updates in February that change how the tool actually works in practice. Agent Teams is now available in research preview, letting multiple Claude instances collaborate in parallel on complex coding tasks. Think of it as assigning a problem to a team rather than a single developer. One instance handles the architecture, another writes the tests, a third reviews the output. Automatic memory launches a background process that learns your preferences and your codebase over time without you having to do anything. It observes the way you work and builds a persistent context that carries forward across sessions. Skills autoloading means any skills you drop into a directory are discovered automatically, which matters if you're running a shared repository across a team. There are also cleaner CLI authentication commands, a native Windows ARM64 binary for developers on ARM hardware, session auto-naming with /rename, selective conversation summarization, and tighter VS Code integration. This is Claude Code moving from a single session coding helper into something closer to a persistent development teammate. Running alongside that story is the OpenClaw 2026.2.21 release, which dropped on February 21st and was substantial. The most significant headline is Gemini 3.1 integration. OpenClaw now natively supports Google's latest flagship model alongside its existing Claude and GPT support, expanding the options available to operators building autonomous AI workflows. Security hardening was extensive. This single release included over 100 fixes targeting known vulnerability patterns, following a period of escalating scrutiny from researchers and regulators worldwide. The Discord upgrades are worth noting for teams that use it as a coordination layer. Streaming previews now show inline results, voice channel support landed via a /VC command, and notification spam was significantly reduced. Thread-bound sub-agent sessions mean that when OpenClaw spawns sub-agents, they're now scoped to individual threads rather than bleeding across conversations, which was a critical architectural gap.
Which brings us to a related story that has been growing quietly, but carries real consequences. The rise of managed hosting services for OpenClaw. Companies like OpenClaw.ai launched this month, offering hosted instances of OpenClaw. You pay a monthly fee, they handle the deployment and the security patching. On one level, this is practical. Not every business has the technical staff to self-host a complex AI orchestration system and keep it patched against a rapidly evolving threat landscape. On another level, it directly undercuts what makes OpenClaw valuable: the open-source, self-hosted model that keeps your data, your prompts, and your workflows off someone else's servers. Paying a third party to run OpenClaw for you means your most sensitive automation logic is now in their infrastructure. The convenience is real. So is the trade-off. Every business using a managed OpenClaw service needs to ask exactly the same questions they'd ask before handing their email to a vendor. Who has access? What do they log? And what happens to your data if the service goes dark? Meanwhile, the economics of running AI at all continued their dramatic shift. NVIDIA H100 GPUs have lost approximately 85% of their value since peak pricing, from around $40,000 new to roughly $6,000 on the secondary market. Cloud rental rates followed the same trajectory, from $8 per hour in late 2024 to $285 to $350 per hour today, a 64% collapse. AWS cut its H100 rates by 44% in June 2025. GCP spot pricing sits around $225. Over 300 new cloud providers entered the market in 2025, driving competition that is still compressing margins across the industry. For small businesses, this means the compute that was prohibitively expensive 18 months ago is now genuinely accessible.
The political dimension of AI came to a head this week in a way that will matter for years. The Trump administration, through executive action, effectively blacklisted Anthropic from federal defense contracts. The stated reason involved compliance concerns, specifically Anthropic's safety-first posture, which some in the administration viewed as an obstacle to certain military applications. Within 24 hours of that announcement, OpenAI had signed its own deal with the Pentagon. The contrast was not subtle, and the message to the broader AI industry was unmistakable. Safety commitments have a price in the current political environment. OpenAI's contract with the Department of Defense includes what the company described as layered protections, 3 explicit red lines prohibiting certain autonomous weapons applications, with oversight mechanisms built into the agreement. Whether those protections are substantive or performative is a debate the defense community is still having. What is not debatable is the signal. The federal government is actively sorting AI companies into preferred and non-preferred vendors. That sorting will shape federal procurement, enterprise software adoption, and ultimately which platforms define the standard for AI at scale. For Anthropic, the practical response was immediate. On February 24th, the company launched an expanded commercial push through its co-work platform, adding enterprise plugins for finance, HR, engineering, and design, alongside a formal partnership with PwC for finance and life sciences deployment. When your government revenue is at risk, you move harder on your commercial revenue. The enterprise market became Anthropic's insurance policy this week. 3 days before the Pentagon deal was signed, a story broke that reframed every conversation about AI capability. Bloomberg reported on February 25th that a hacker had used Anthropic's Claude code, the same tool that shipped 6 new features this month, to steal approximately 150 gigabytes of data from Mexican government agencies. The haul included roughly 195 million taxpayer records. The attacker used Claude Code's ability to automate complex technical workflows, directing it to navigate systems and exfiltrate data at a scale that would have required a skilled team working for weeks. It happened in a fraction of that time. This is not a story about Claude Code being broken. It is a story about what happens when any powerful capability, the same one that makes developers 10 times more productive, lands in hands that want to use it as a weapon. The same context window and agentic planning that make it a legitimate productivity tool also made it a force multiplier for an attacker. IBM's X-Force report, released the same week, documented a 44% year-over-year increase in AI-assisted attacks. The pattern is clear. The security conversation cannot be an afterthought.
Into this charged landscape, Genspark launched an AI browser that frames tool independence differently. Available for Windows and Mac, it runs up to 169 open-source AI models entirely on your device. No API subscription required. No data leaving your machine. No exposure to any of the geopolitical and legal turbulence swirling around the major platforms. For businesses watching the OpenAI Pentagon deal and the Anthropic blacklisting, and wondering whether their tools could be caught in similar crossfire, a locally run model browser is a genuine hedge. It won't outperform GPT-5 on raw benchmarks, but it offers a kind of sovereignty that cloud-dependent tools simply cannot match. Manus, arriving in Ads Manager this week, represents the other end of that spectrum. Deep embedding rather than independence. Meta integrated its Manus AI agent directly into its advertising platform, giving small business advertisers AI-driven campaign strategy, audience targeting, and optimization inside the tool where they already work. No new subscription, no learning curve. It is genuinely useful. The question that should accompany that usefulness is, when the AI advising your ad strategy is built and operated by the platform collecting your ad spend, whose interests is it optimizing for? And finally, the Amazon OpenAI $50 billion AWS partnership framed the week's financial architecture. This is the largest strategic AI partnership in history, and it signals a clear direction. AI is no longer a separate product category. It is becoming infrastructure, embedded inside the platforms you already depend on. That makes it more accessible and harder to walk away from at the same time. For every small business navigating this moment, the practical work is the same. Know which platforms hold your data. Know what you're getting from each AI tool, and know where you want to keep your options open. The companies making $100 billion decisions have made their choices. Yours matter too.
So what does all of this add up to, practically, for a small business trying to decide what to do next? Start with Claude Opus 4.6 and Claude Code. If you have developers on your team, or if you're using any AI coding assistant at all, this is the moment to test whether the 1 million token context window changes what you can actually accomplish. The ability to hold an entire code base in context changes how you debug, how you refactor, how you scope new features. That is not a marginal improvement, it is a structural one. Try it on your most complex project, not your simplest. On OpenClaw, if you are running a self-hosted installation, the 2026.221 update is not optional. The security hardening addresses vulnerabilities that researchers have already published. If you are considering a managed hosting service instead, treat it like any other vendor that would have access to your operational data, which means a security review, a data handling agreement, and an honest assessment of whether the convenience is worth the exposure. The GPU price story has a direct implication that is easy to miss. If you have been deferring AI experiments because the compute costs seemed prohibitive, those costs are now a fraction of what they were. A budget that would have rented 10 hours of H100 time in 2024 now buys 60 or more. This is the window to run experiments that your organization previously couldn't afford. The political story, Anthropic's blacklisting, OpenAI's Pentagon deal, the Amazon AWS consolidation, is slower moving, but worth watching. The decisions being made right now about which AI companies are federally preferred are going to shape enterprise procurement patterns for the next several years. If you have federal customers or government contracts, understanding your AI vendor's political standing is now part of your vendor management process. And finally, the security picture from Mexico and the IBM X-Force report has a simple takeaway. The AI tools that make your team more capable are the same tools being used against systems like yours. The entry point in most attacks isn't a sophisticated exploit. It's an unpatched application, a reused password, or a staff member who didn't recognize a convincing AI-generated phishing message. The technical sophistication of the attack has increased dramatically. The defensive basics have not changed. That is the AI landscape as of March 2nd, 2026. It is more powerful, more contested, more affordable, and more dangerous than it was this time last year. Navigate it with both eyes open.
That's it for this week's AI Assembled, the top AI news for small business. If you found this valuable, share it with a fellow business owner. If you want a hands-on group that you can work with on your specific AI needs, consider joining Business Success Academy at freshmediaworks.com/BSA. Until next week, keep innovating and keep it real.